diving into a fascinating figure today. We got a ton of stuff about Felix Mitchell, and honestly, it's more than just your average gangster story. Thousands at his funeral, horse-drawn carriage, 14 Rolls Royces. It's wild.
It's definitely not your typical send-off, that's for sure.
It makes you wonder, what's the real story here? Was he some kind of community hero, or was it just a glamorized, glorification of crime?
That's what we're going to try to figure out. It's a lot more complicated than it seems. I mean, to even begin to understand that funeral, you really got to go back, look at Mitchell's whole life.
Okay, so let's rewind. We got all this material you sent.
Yeah.
And it's like Oakland in the 60s and 70s, poverty, no opportunities.
Right, a breeding ground almost. And there's young Felix Mitchell right in the middle of it all.
Born 54, right?
Yeah, born and raised in Oakland, grew up in the project San Antonio Village, if I remember correctly, drops out of high school, starts this group that turns into, well, the 69 mob.
Yeah, infamous.
And get this, he wasn't just some small-time hood. He had connections all over L.A., even Detroit.
Wow, so this was organized, thought out. He had big plans, clearly.
Definitely ambitious. And we got to remember, this was before crack. Heroin was the big thing back then. Mitchell, he saw an opening, a way to make a name for himself.
So how did he get so powerful so fast? There's got to be more to it.
Well, from what I gathered, seems he hooked up with this L.A. kingpin, Tootie Reese.
Reese.
Yeah, already had a huge network in the Bay Area and beyond. So kind of like a mentor, I guess you could say, in the drug world.
Ah, that explains it.
Mitchell, he was in the thick of it. Turf wars all the time, rival gangs, Mickey Moore's crew, Funktown, USA. Super violent stuff.
So we've got Felix the Cat.
Oh, yeah, that nickname.
It does add this whole other layer to it all, doesn't it? Like cartoonish, but he's running this giant heroin ring.
$5 million a year, some estimates say.
5 million.
That buys you a lot of power influence. But it also makes you a target. That's where things start to unravel, I guess.
Leads to the downfall, right? 1985, cops finally catch up to him.
Yep. Arrested, convicted, life sentence, off to Leavenworth.
Typical story for a guy like that, you'd think.
You'd think. Except, here's where it gets really weird.
Weird how?
Just over a year later, 2 days shy of his 32nd birthday, Mitchell's killed in prison. Stabbed.
Oh, wow. Tragic, but I guess not totally surprising, given, the life.
Yeah. But then you get to the funeral, and that's when things get really interesting.
Thousands of people, horse-drawn carriage, all those Rolls Royces. You said it before, not your typical send-off. Almost felt more like a celebration.
It did, didn't it? And then you add Huey P. Newton into the mix.
Black Panther Party co-founder. What was he doing at a drug lord's funeral?
Right. Adds another layer of complexity to it all. Why would someone like that, such a prominent figure, be there?
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, you have this huge outpouring of respect, almost worship. But on the other, wasn't it, I don't know, kind of dangerous?
Yeah.
Sending a mixed message, especially to young people who maybe saw him as a role model. How do you even start to make sense of that? It's almost like a legend, His death, the funeral, the whole thing. But hold on, we got to talk about this other crazy twist. His conviction, it gets overturned, right?
A year after his death, yeah. He died before they could hear his appeal. So, legally speaking, he wasn't a criminal anymore.
So officially, he died an innocent man. Talk about a bizarre turn of events. But even if his name was cleared, his impact on Oakland, especially on the criminal side of things, that doesn't just disappear, right?
Exactly. And this is where we get to this thing called the Felix Mitchell paradox. You'd figure take out a major player like Mitchell, crime goes down. But that's not what happened at all.
Wait, hold up. It actually increased after he was gone. I don't get it. How does that even work?
Imagine it like, a dam holding back a flood. Mitchell, his control, his grip on everything, it kept a weird sort of balance, a monopoly on violence almost. Brutal, but it kind of worked. Take him out of the picture, the dam breaks. Chaos everywhere, all these smaller gangs fighting for scraps.
So his power, it actually stabilized things.
Yeah.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
It really goes against everything we think we know about crime. You'd think just locking up the big guy solves everything. But the Felix Mitchell paradox, it shows us that's not enough. You got to deal with the root causes. The poverty, no jobs, the cycle of violence.
It's way more complicated than just bad guy goes to jail, happy ending. Huh?
Way more. But it still leaves us with this puzzle. Felix the Cat. Criminal mastermind. just a product of his environment? Was he both? I mean, he did have that Robin Hood image, giving back to the community, those huge parties he'd throw for the kids, even paying people's rent sometimes, buying
Right?
groceries.
Those parties were legendary, weren't they? Like, he was flaunting his success, but also sharing it,
Yeah.
even if the money came from, well,
Yeah. Exactly. Fueled that Robin Hood image.
yeah.
But we can't forget the damage. The drug trade, the lives lost, families destroyed.
It's a tough one. We're trying to fit these two extremes together. Community leader, drug lord.
You've hit it, Mitchell. He's not black and white. All these contradictions, that's what makes him so fascinating.
So what does it all mean for us now? His story's a mess of contradictions. What are we supposed to learn from it?
I think it shows us that things are rarely simple. It's a reminder, you know? Look for the nuances, people, situations. They're rarely just good or bad. And the solutions, those aren't always clear-cut either.
Getting rid of a kingpin, that's a headline. But it doesn't magically fix a broken system. We got to tackle the big stuff. Poverty, inequality, the lack of opportunity. That's where guys like Mitchell come from.
You got it. And maybe his story can make us think differently about the stories we tell about crime, about poverty. It's easy to judge, slap a label on someone, hero or villain. But Mitchell, he shows us those labels don't tell the whole story.
So we've gone deep on Felix Mitchell, and we're left with a lot to think about. This paradox, that funeral, a snapshot of a man, a community, fighting forces bigger than them.
And for you listening, here's a final thought. If Mitchell's conviction was overturned, does that change how you see him? Was he just a victim of his circumstances who found power in a bad way? Or did he take advantage of those circumstances?
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. Makes you think about what making it really means, especially when the system is, you know, stacked against you.
For sure. And that's where I think Mitchell's story gets really interesting. It ties into all these bigger issues. Social mobility, inequality, that whole idea of getting rich quick, even if it's not exactly legal.
Right, because for a guy like Mitchell, growing up poor, violence everywhere, maybe the right way just wasn't an option, you know? So he makes his own rules, his own way, even if it means breaking the law.
Yeah, it's like the ends justify the means, right? But Mitchell's story, it shows what happens. Those means, they come back to haunt you. Violence, chaos, it affects everyone for years.
Which brings us back to that funeral. The spectacle. The message it sent. What do you think it says about Mitchell's place in Oakland?
Honestly, I think it shows just how much confusion, how much uncertainty there was, even within his own community. Some people, they genuinely mourned him. They saw him as a leader, someone who took care of them. But for others, there had to be this unease. Like, yeah, he did some good, but look at the cost.
Almost like the community itself was torn. They lost someone who, in his own twisted way, brought some order. But they knew he was also responsible for so much darkness.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so captivating. There are no easy answers. It forces you to confront the hard truths about ourselves, about society.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with this question. How do we remember Felix Mitchell? Criminal mastermind, folk hero, something else entirely?
That's up to each of us to figure out. But I hope, that this has made you curious. To dig deeper, look past the simple explanations. It's a fascinating chapter in Oakland's history, even if it's a tragic one.
And to everyone listening, keep digging, read those sources, find different viewpoints, and come to your own conclusions about the Felix Mitchell paradox. What does it tell us about crime, poverty, about what it means to be human? Until next time, happy diving.